and it's go time. In 3, 2, 1, let's go. Welcome to G Money, real talk on everything mortgage and real estate related. Today I'm here with Bridget, broker and owner of Joe Cap Real Estate. Welcome.
You. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited. I've had other realtors in the industry come and join us, but today you're our first property manager.
Glad to be here.
Boy, do I have some questions for you.
I bet. Yeah.
Well, before we get there, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Bridget.
Well, I'm a local Venturan.
Okay.
My parents both grew up here as well, graduated from Ventura High.
All right.
And I graduated from Buena and went all the way up to Santa Barbara for college and majored in film studies, film history. And right out of college was already engaged in getting married. And so it was just natural for me to stay here in Ventura and be close to family. And so, yeah, I love Ventura and really glad to still be here.
Yeah. Any children, any hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work?
Yep. I have two daughters, Eva and Cece, and they are 23 and 17.
Okay.
And so both at home right now. In transition times, the younger one is a junior still at Foothill.
Okay.
And so it's been really nice having a full house again.
Yeah.
Having them both at home. But yeah, we love the beach.
Yes.
We love to drive around town. We love to eat. We love all of our fun restaurants that we have in Ventura.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
You were just saying Mother's Day, you had Cafe Fiore, a little family meal.
Yep, their family takeout meals are a great bargain.
Oh my
Great
goodness.
Food and really nice portions.
Beyond the bargain, they are just amazing. There's so many fond memories of date nights there for sure.
Same. Mm-hmm.
Even my little daddy-daughter dates. I've taken our girls individually. We like to do little dates one-on-one to get some special time. And they both have been to Fiore and gotten all dressed up in their little princess gowns and had some great meals there.
Yeah, we have so many great restaurants and you just can't go wrong.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's very nice. And they're local restaurants, not chains. That's what I also really appreciate about Ventura.
Yep, you know the people that own them and run them and work there. It's nice.
Yeah, so, real estate, and we're going to just talk about realtors in general. I'm always inquisitive. Such a vast, we'll say everybody's reasoning for getting into it, whether it was a family thing or they saw that there was a good opportunity. What drove you into real estate?
Well, getting married young definitely was a benefit to home ownership, and luckily my husband saw that as a very important thing to do quickly, so we bought our first house back in 96.
Okay.
And then found one just a few blocks away that was better suited for what we needed at the time, so we moved just down the street, literally, and then needed a little bit more space and moved again.
Okay.
All those three transactions, in my mind, were really, actually the first two were super, you saw nothing. You saw no part of the back end. You signed a couple of documents. It wasn't like it was now.
Yeah.
It all just kind of happened magically.
Yeah.
And it never caught my eye. But the third time that we moved, it was a different market. It was a different kind of contract. I was a little older at the time, and I think it just seemed more interesting overall. And the person that guided us through that sale and purchase also had a small child. I was having my first daughter at the time, and it just seemed like interesting and also difficult.
Yes.
We weren't difficult clients, but it was a different kind of market, and it took a lot more work that I was able to see. And by the end of that, I thought, you know what, I could do this. I had been in the fashion industry doing product development and product development mostly. And so by the time my daughter was 2, 3, getting ready to go into preschool, I was commuting to Santa Barbara. It had been a really hard few years. You're just drained when you get home from that drive, no matter what. And so I got my license and made that transition.
The rest is history. Here we are.
Back.
So many, we'll say outsiders that, haven't gotten into the industry yet. They work at Vaughn's or, outside sales, whatever it is, they see it and they just always oh, that looks so easy.
Right.
I'm just going to make an extra $30,000 here and there. And believe me, folks, it's not that easy.
Yeah, it's not. And that's actually what made it interesting to me.
Yeah.
Is I could see this requires a lot.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she was like toting around her toddler when she had to. You know, a house comes on, you got to see it kind of quickly. Just all of it made it look like so much more than I had ever thought of it prior. So that's really what.
Well, and you're definitely speaking one of the high perks, which it's flexible, right? We're not punching a time clock. You have to put in the hours, and that's definitely a given. But as long as you're putting in the hours, you can go drop your child off at daycare, get them going at school, put in some work, dedicated, work, go back at noon, pick them up from preschool. You can definitely have that flexible schedule. It just requires the work to be put in. So, and then, getting into it, you've been in, probably similar. I'm 24 years in the industry. I think you're pretty close to that.
2003.
Yeah. So have you always done property management, or you just kind of initially jumped in with the real estate sales is kind of what you primarily focused on?
I did sales up until the market declined. And in 2010, I was struggling.
Yes.
It was a tough time to be a realtor. I felt like
And a
I was
lender.
kind of playing pretend there for about a year.
Yeah.
And
reality sinks in of like,
this is not cutting it.
Right.
I think I sold one little condo one year. Probably $300,000 condo. And that was a tough time. And I had heard from a friend in the industry that this office at Joe Cap Real Estate needed a property manager at the time.
Okay.
And he had a small business of property management, plus he had a full house of agents. So I moved right in there and started working at that office. And so I just moved my license, added property management to my learning curve.
Sure.
And so since 2010, I feel like I've still been learning every day.
Yeah.
Especially the last couple years because of all the changes.
Yeah. I'm originally from the Central Valley, and I don't know if you know that, but it was the same time period, I call it the foreclosure crisis, starting in 2000, late 2008, 2009. My phone never stopped ringing. It was just, I couldn't help the underwater borrowers. Yeah. They really came out with a lot of mortgage programs late to the game, and they were still very challenging. So it was in 2010 that, actually 2009 leading up to that I scratched my head and I said, do I want to continue this? Am I having a quarter life crisis? What's going on here? Do I, what's my what's my next move? I've got to change this scenario. And that's when I moved to Ventura. The light bulb came on. I love what I do. I help people. It's self-fulfilling. It's fun. How do I make more money? And sadly, I'm going to say I'll own it. I chased the money. It was like from the Central Valley, a home that was worth $425,000 was barely selling for $100,000. And then in contrast, coming down to a beach community, it was like, okay, starter home, $375,000, $425,000. These are the price ranges that I'm accustomed to, that I desire. I could sell, one a month and do okay financially. And so 2010 is January of 2010 is when I moved here and kind of redeveloped myself and kind of expanded, and look at where we are today, right?
Yeah. Still happy to be, doing the daily.
So with the property management, I have so many questions, but also concerns, because with all of our licensing and just my background as well, as I do have my DRE license. When I started doing lending, that was the only license that you had to have. And so I obtained it. And then after 2010, then they came out with the NMLS. So then I got my mortgage license, and I was like, well, even though I don't practice it, on the real estate side, I don't want to just give it up. So, so I've kept it.
Smart.
And so with that, I'm smart or not, I have to pay for it every 4 years. I have to do the continuing education. Plus I'm licensed in mortgages in California, plus a few other states. I am scared to death on everything I read about the rental side.
Yeah.
When we get into the trust accounts and, your fiduciary responsibility. I'm just scared of all of that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you're going to clarify some of this today, hopefully.
Yeah. It's serious business.
Yeah. So let's take it back. So you've been at Joe Cap since about 2010.
Yep.
And now you're the broker owner. When did that transition occur?
So Joe has had his license since the year I was born of 73, coincidentally.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had that brokerage in that location on Seaward for a long
Yes.
time. It was kind of an iconic little spot overlooking the freeway. And he had kind of always said, I could do this for 5 more years, every year. It was just, he had created this great spot that just worked. And COVID, in my opinion, really kind of made him step back and go, this is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
All these changes to the way that we show property, the
Right.
contracts, the new addendums, things like that. And so it was at that point that he started talking about, I think it's time. And he's one of those people that once he makes that decision,
It's done.
let's do it tomorrow.
Okay.
And so it took a little bit of negotiating, but it was, it worked out for both of us. So I was
that's
very
great.
grateful. So that was in 2021.
Okay.
January 2021, I took over. And we also, at the time, we were losing our longtime lease that he had on Seaward.
Okay.
So we moved into the spot where we are now, kind of by the Rubicon on Main Street.
Yep.
Great little spot. We have nice, super sweet landlords. And I've got a desk for Joe.
Okay.
I won't say he's retired because he still is out there networking and connecting with the community and bringing in leads
Yeah.
constantly. He's
Oh,
got
that's
salesperson in his blood.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
And that's incidentally how I got started in the mortgage world. My dad was a district sales manager for Stewart Title and did the title company. I don't think I ever woke up and was like, "Ooh, I'm going to be a lender one
Right.
day."
Right.
But then as he phased out of the title industry, then he kind of started working on mortgages. And so it was kind of like, okay, I could do this. I like this. And I really, chaperoned with him for a long time. And although he's getting up there in age and I'm going to say fully retired, he's still, I'll come over to his house and he's tinkering around on the computer and chatting with some old clients. He's still just,
Yeah.
trying to give himself some purpose.
Because that's what he was an expert at.
Yes.
It's hard to let that go
Yes.
when you did it for so long. Even if you're not like in it,
Yeah.
it's still in you.
I don't wish him the stress that we have.
Yeah.
And today's world is,
Yeah.
I don't know, so much more in depth. It seems like, I look back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'm like, did I have stress? Were loans this difficult back then?
Everything. My husband was just saying we were doing something on our phones with our calendar, and we both were saying this makes us more efficient, and yet we're not working less.
Yes.
All these things that we have at our jobs, it feels like we should be like sweet, smooth sailing, but it is still a grind.
And let's just take into a real estate transaction. I'm going to say most transactions, loosely, most are 30 days. And now we're pressured more than ever to perform in 25, 21, 15, whatever. In 30 days, that contract time period hasn't changed since I started. But the amount of steps that we have involved and the behind the scenes protocols of anti-fraud and this and that and new forms and compliance and timelines.
Yep.
When I first started, there was no loan estimate and closing disclosure that
Right.
had waiting periods. It's like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So
Yeah.
every day is a day that the
One
clock
more
is
step,
ticking.
just adding it in there, and you still get 30 days or
Oh
less.
my goodness. So now that you've taken over Joe Cap and this is your baby, we're going to call it, how much would you say is, just rough guesstimate on the property management versus the resale? I mean, is it a 50-50, half of what you do is rentals, or is it kind of more rentals, or does it go in waves?
It comes in waves. I would say it's heavier on the property management just because it's a significant business that has built up over years.
Sure.
And also, property management is more of like a lot of follow-up, a lot of detail, a lot of interaction. Whereas real estate, really, with your experience over years and years, you can really make that a very smooth path. And it can happen in quiet time, but the property management really dominates our time because it is that busy kind of work. Lots of follow-up, lots of communicating with tenants and vendors and, just making sure things got done. And if it didn't, why didn't it? And then you have to verify, well, who dropped the ball? Did somebody, which person didn't call the person back? Was it the tenant or the vendor? To push it through. Sometimes property management's funny because it's often the little things that take the most time. Sure. It turns into a big thing, even though it seems like, gosh, this should be so simple. Yeah. And those are the kind of headaches that we take it off the owner.
And with the headaches and just kind of, I guess thinking about it, you have dual side here where you have the owner that could be demanding in what they're asking for, but then you also have the tenants and the tenant rights. So you're kind of hit from two sides here of making sure that property is rolling smoothly.
Yeah, it's very challenging. You have to be very patient. You have to let people say their piece, their part, get it off their chest. Sometimes it's just being a good listener. Yeah. And then now let's solve the problem, because all your ranting, it just needed to get out. It's not solving the problem, but it's going to make you feel better getting it out. You be mad at me, that's fine. But then now we can figure out, let's solve the problem.
So chat with me the difference between the accidental landlords and investor owners.
Sure. So an accidental landlord is somebody that comes into a home some way, either inheriting it, maybe their family moves out of town and so they're going to rent it for them, or they move out of town and they decide, I don't want to sell my house, but I also don't want to be a landlord. I'm busy doing this in my job. I'm not a professional here. I'm over here and I don't want to deal with it. Those are accidental landlords, people that come into it by accident and they choose not to assume, it's easy, I can do it myself. Right. Some people do. We get a lot of those too. They bring it to us like, I tried this and now something's gone wrong. It was great for 2 years and all of a sudden it's a mess. I need you to just take over. Right. And we step in, we try and soften things up, figure out what was wrong, how can we fix it, and then we just kind of smooth it all out and take over. Yeah. And then people who are purposely getting into it, those are the investors that are buying property, bringing it to us. Maybe they have a book of business, multiple units, whatever they choose, but that's their thing. That's their income stream on purpose, and that they still use us as the property management side.
Gotcha. So if you don't mind, maybe I'm so distant and removed, and I'm trying to think back of like, what's the last home that I rented and how did I rent it? What's a today modern, process? An owner of a property calls you up, and what's, the kind of the first steps? I mean, do you help them set market rents? Do you walk the property? Maybe just walk me through that.
Yes. So we have a software program that does a nice rent search. Oh. So it is a very popular program called Appfolio. And the nice thing about that is that multiple people in this area use the same program. Okay. And so you can do a quick market search and it pulls advertising from everybody else in Appfolio that's using it, and gives you a research kind of pull. For this similar property, you've got a 3+2 for 1,400 square feet. This is the average price in the nearby vicinity. And then we also will pull it up online and other websites to double check, what are the current what do they look like? Because this doesn't give you a breakdown of exactly where they are, what their upgrades are. So you got to dig a little deeper. Knowing your market too is really going to help you figure out, that house over there, I know it was highly updated. You're probably not competing quite with that, but let's go in the range. So you come to it from all different things, but then every once in a while you find a real gem that it's a house that's above and beyond, and it might attract a better tenant, a different caliber, maybe a higher price. So those are all things that have to come into the conversation.
So they call you up, you kind of run some numbers, and then you visit the property.
Got to walk it.
Make sure that everything. Do you at that time go over like potential repairs or health and safety issues? Like, do you have I'm sure, a checklist for all of this?
Yeah. And we go over what should be done, what needs to be done in order to start marketing it. Some owners don't have deep enough pockets to do what you might think is real basic and necessary. And so you kind of have to weigh that. Okay, well, if you can't paint the house and it's peeling everywhere, we're probably going to have to price it more competitively.
Yeah.
You know, because somebody's going to walk up to it and it's not going to be very attractive.
Right.
But then we, you know, maybe we can budget and put $300-400 aside for the next a year, and you can paint it next year. So we can work with people when they have tight situations like that. That does make it a little bit more challenging when they're not able to maintain their property and they bring you a problem.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Because those problems sometimes they just compound. Something else goes wrong, and it's difficult.
Right. I mean,
everybody's in a financial.
If you're seeing deferred maintenance, it's not just one item. Typically,
Right.
it's multiple
It's things,
items.
yes.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'm sure you do a good job. I think it's so much. If you don't stay up on the maintenance, it's going to, in the long run, cost you more because, you know, again, the property that I own next door, the water heater looked old. I mean, I could tell it was old. And I'm just like, you know, before I have my tenant in here full time and it's Sunday afternoon
Right.
and I'm calling a plumber on overtime
on Easter.
I'm just going to proactively replace it. And so I did, you know, and so I see that, but not everybody does.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
You gotta kind of nudge them a little bit.
Yep. And it just, their situations are all different, so they respond differently to your suggestions.
Yeah. And then you market and list the property for rent. Do you do signs out front as well as online? I'm sure on your website and stuff. And then there's the tenant screening, and this probably is one of the more challenging things I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And I mean, would you say most properties you get 10 applications for one rental? Is there a certain number in the area? I know we're kind of starving for housing.
It's a tight market. Yes, inventory is very tight. But I would say since about November, we have felt a bit of a softening.
Okay.
And so a very special property in the right price range is going to get a ton of activity, but that hasn't been like 100% across the board. It's been interesting. It's definitely softened over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And we've had to make some adjustments, recently offering on a couple of different properties some rent incentives. So, you know, apply now, you'll get a $500 credit towards your first month's rent.
Oh, okay.
Our criteria has not softened. We're still expecting people to meet our criteria
Yeah,
specifically.
and I was getting there.
But yeah, it's softer. So I wouldn't say 10 applications is common,
Okay.
you know?
So criteria, and this is one of those, like, again, your responsibility is initially to the homeowner. And so you want to have some criteria, but I don't think there's like standardized guidelines per se.
Right. Each person, each landlord, company, however it's set up, can set their own guidelines.
Yeah.
They can say, your credit score must be 800, right?
Yeah.
That's not reasonable, but
Right.
you could come up with your own guidelines. And as long as it's very clear
Yeah.
and you're following those, then you're obeying the law.
Yeah.
It's when you fluctuate and you make special exceptions. Oh, but I just really liked that person. I don't care
Right.
that their credit was low. I'm going to recommend them. Well, that's not being fair. That's a fair housing discrimination to the other people who apply
Right.
and have the qualifications. If you're choosing somebody that doesn't match because you had some other rapport with them, it gets tricky. That's where one of the biggest liabilities are right now with property management is the fair housing discrimination guidelines. And it's not a difficult thing to follow, but it's very rigid.
Yes.
And so as long as you are aware of it, educated, informing and educating your agents as well. All of my property managers are licensed agents, which makes it nice because they've gone through all of the continuing education as well. But it's really those fair housing questions that you have to be very aware and conscientious of how you answer these questions so that you're fair to everybody. And two different people walk through the door, the answer must be the same for both of them. And so as long as we follow all these guidelines, we're doing the right thing by our landlords and keeping them out of having to be the one facing those questions.
So I imagine there must be some leniency in renting versus buying, maybe? I mean, in terms of like...
Oh, qualifying?
Qualifying, yeah. And that's where like...
Sure.
Well, I mean, credit score wise, like for the most part, conventional loans goes down to 620. We have some programs, FHA and others, that'll go, 580, sometimes below with compensating factors if you have large assets and reserves, things like that. But then we have hard lines on major adverse actions such as foreclosure, bankruptcy, things like that. Now, I'm just reflecting back and on many others that did go through the foreclosure crisis in the early 2010, and then they would go out and rent, and it was sometimes they would hurry to rent before the foreclosure hit. Without giving all your secret sauce away, I guess, of your particular guidelines, what are some of the leniencies or minimum criteria rather that a renter can expect?
Right. Well, we're looking for a credit score of 650.
Okay.
And that can be an average. So say somebody's a 725 and 630, it's going to average above 650 between the two of them.
Yeah.
So that'll work.
Okay.
And then we're looking for strong rental history.
Okay.
At least your last 3 years of landlord references.
Okay.
So if they've moved twice, we want 2-a-year landlords, both of them. We're going to verify, did you pay rent on time? Did you ever bounce a check? Did you give proper notice? Verifying, did you have a pet? Because on your application over here, it said no.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe the property was pet friendly, but if you said no and they say yes, then we have to dig deeper in that because we want your application to float in with all the questions correct and accurate.
Yeah.
And then your income, we're looking for 2.5 times the monthly rent as income, and that's combined. So even if that's mom, dad, and their 25-year-old son, and they're going to contribute as well, we screen anybody over the age of 18.
Now, do you take liabilities into consideration or just that formula?
Typically, we just take those formulas.
Okay.
And on the credit report, we're going to look at, their scores need to match, but also their overhead, can they afford it? So.
I'm sure you're familiar, we use debt to income ratio. And so we take the proposed housing plus the minimum payments on their credit report and we divide that into their income. And for conversation, that could be a max of 50%. So double, the income needs to be at least double. With your formula, I guess that works because it's 2.5 times. You're giving yourself kind of a
little cushion,
lower debt to income ratio. But then you could also have, there's this exceptions to everything. That one guy that has, $1,000 Tesla payment and $100,000 in credit card debt, where they have a lot of debts. I guess as long as they pay it on time, that's really what you're looking for, right? And that contributes to the credit score
and
as well.
And maybe that person's going to need to show their bank statement to show they have assets in the bank on top of what their income is to kind of balance that out.
Okay.
So they can provide that. Sometimes it get tricky with people who are paid in cash.
Yeah.
It's because we really want to see bank statements and things. Okay, well, maybe you can't document your income, but you have to show somewhere. Where's the money? You have to show us.
So you're more flexible than I'd say we are. Again, if they're paid in cash and things like that, as long as they have bank statements to support it, something to support it.
And people like that, we're going to lean a little heavier on the credit report, and that rental reference. Really make sure that that's a shining review. Yeah.
And then, you've got a young couple. They just graduated college. This is their first rental. Now what?
Typically, we require a guarantor.
Okay.
So somebody's going to put their application in on their behalf, and with shining colors, there can't be one single concern on there. It's got to be a perfect app, and then that person can guarantee the lease. And after a year of paying on time with the tenants in place, we can discuss removing the guarantor.
Yeah.
They can kind of requalify. They'll submit hey, this is our job. We didn't have a job when we moved in, or maybe it was brand new, but now here's our history, and I've got all this, year to date.
Yeah, requalifying. That makes sense.
And we can remove the guarantor.
Yeah. Okay. Any other qualifiers that I'm not thinking of that you want to bring up?
No, housing vouchers have really changed.
Okay.
This year, it became much more rigid on how to qualify a housing tenant. So say somebody they want to rent a $3,000 house and they have a voucher for $2,000. So their portion's only 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
They only have to bring in 2.5 times their portion.
Okay.
And so there are just some other ways to work with housing tenants nowadays that make it a lot more specific to them, that benefits that program, which
Okay.
in my mind is a good thing.
Yeah.
There's always a bad seed in every program, right?
Yes.
But housing has traditionally had a bad rap, and I don't think it's fair. And so what the state has done as well is, now if somebody calls, do you accept housing vouchers? The answer is yes. No matter who you're calling, it is illegal to turn them down.
Yeah.
So you have to say yes. And sometimes when people call me and they say, do you accept housing vouchers? I say, yes. And you shouldn't even have to ask that question. If you're calling other companies and they're telling you no, that's
Yeah.
discrimination.
And my understanding,
law.
I own a rental. I've chat with many clients that own rentals. I have, a friend that owns several rentals. I've inquired, and the vouchers, from what I hear, are excellent tenants because
Yep.
they don't want to mess up their opportunity. And if they don't pay or they damage the home, they'll get booted out of the program. And they don't want that, right? So typically it is a pretty smooth transaction.
It really
is what
can
I've
be. I
heard.
would say 9 out of 10 times you've got a great tenant, but that's with every pool of renters, whether
Yeah.
they're housing or not. There's always a bad apple in there
Yeah.
that sours your, favoritism of tenants. And so housing has technically got that bad rap. The difficult part about housing, and we actually got a meeting next month with the director of the housing department here in Ventura. My question is, they do annual inspections. We do annual inspections. Well, they might come back to us and say, the window won't lock. The top right burner is not working. And the front door lock is loose. You need to fix these things and replace the smoke alarm. And then we go in, we do all those things, we fix it, the owner pays for it, and then maybe 6 months later we do our inspection, we walk in and go, wait a minute, there's a lot more going on here. So housing has this responsibility to go in and do an inspection of the property, but if there's a sanitation issue or some other problem that's not on their list, they don't even mention it. That's the difficult thing, where we're finding a little bit of a breakdown with housing inspections versus what's expected of a landlord
Yeah.
versus, what's expected of the tenant. So we're working on that.
Yeah. Wow. See, I told you there's a lot to this.
Yeah.
What are you finding? I always just, in the real estate side here, rents are up, 3% year over year, 6%. Is there a certain consistent number in our area that you find is pretty good?
I wish there
You
was
wish.
something, because COVID changed our market for both sales and rentals
Okay.
crazy, right?
Yeah.
Prices just went bananas. And a lot of people who had been in a rental maybe 5 years prior to COVID, then COVID, maybe they had one rent increase that whole time, and it was still around market rent, even though the landlord had only done 1 or 2 increases. Then COVID came. Everybody sat tight. We had some holds on everything. And I would say last year, 2023, we had a lot of owners that we were having conversations with. Is it time to do a rent increase? If so, how much? What's fair? What's reasonable? And because of so many rent control conversations, it has created this fear in landlords that now they're like, well, we should do the max because I'm probably not going to be able to next time. And so our rent increases felt a little heavy-handed last year, but I feel like most landlords feel good about, okay, we were able to do this without losing our tenant. The tenant was able to stay. It's still under market rent.
Yeah.
And so our conversation moving forward now is, let's talk about cost of living. Let's not talk about the max or the minimum,
Yeah.
what's allowable. Let's just talk about what's cost of living kind of across the board. And right now it's 4.2. It's going to change next month. I think at the end of July we'll get our next one. And that'll change what the rent increases by tenants who are protected are, but it'll also help our conversation with the tenants and the houses that are not protected by any kind of guidelines.
And right now, what cities? I believe Oxnard has rent control.
Oxnard and Ojai,
Okay.
they both have rent control, similar, little bit differences between them. The tricky part about Ojai is that Ojai is so small. And so we do manage up in Ojai, and but just coming down like Miramonte, Oakview, all of that area, it's not in Ojai, and so it's excluded.
Right.
So it's really just on Ojai proper. Oxnard is pretty big. Santa Paula is tabling that discussion. Port Hueneme just had a meeting a couple of months ago, and they kicked it to the curb. They said, you know what, our town is so small, it would be burdensome and difficult to create this program, and they didn't have enough rentals in their small area to justify.
Good for them.
So I think it'll come back to Ventura again at some point.
Yeah.
Right now.
You know, it's so interesting just chatting with you. My wheels are turning of how much it correlates with just the lending and the resale side. You know, as rents come up, and you're saying they're under market, a lot of that also pertains to purchasing. You know, if you're a committed professional investor and this is what you do, for the most part, you're going to obtain a loan on that property. And so, you know, the big thing is cash flow, right? A good property must positively cash flow, which means you're bringing in more than what the liabilities are. And so when you have somebody that's grandfathered in or has very stale or under market rents, I see that on the MLS all the time, under market rents, it makes it tough in today's market rates of high sevens on an investment property to get that property to cash flow and make it a sound investment.
Right. So a law came out in January of 2020. It's called AB 1482. It's a assembly bill, and that created a Tenant Protection Act and a rent restriction on multi-units. It doesn't apply to single family. So that's a state thing. And then COVID hit, and we never even got to test this out, how it was working. We sent out all these disclosures to our tenants telling them whether they're exempt or not. You had to notify them. Then COVID hit, you got new restrictions. And then once everything kind of opened back up, Oxnard and Ojai are coming in with these more restrictive rent controls just on their city. So we have like over here, and then the state things, multiple things to be aware of when you're moving tenants out, raising their rent, to which ordinance applies here. And it's extremely confusing. It's very misguided. The public is misinformed about it. The tenants are misinformed. Some people get their rent increase and they write us back. I'm protected. There's a Tenant Protection Act in place. I'm sorry, yours is actually exempt. We gave you the disclosure. So it's a very confusing thing. And then at the same time, it has restrictions on how to move out your tenants. And so if you're going to sell and your tenants are way under, the logical thing for an investor would be to get them out so that you can market it and a new investor can do what they wish to this property that they now own.
Right.
But now you can't. These tenants are in there. Basically, they're tenants for life until you do one of the very specific things, whether it's major renovations, you're moving a family member in. There are very specific ways of moving a tenant out, and everything else is not an option.
Yeah. You know, as we rented the property that we acquired, single family, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, again, just going through all my continuing education, I was almost petrified. And so what is nice, it is still overwhelming, as I went to the DRE website, and they do have a lot of information as well as a lot of disclosures. And I didn't care. I printed them and used them all, from bed bugs to check-in lists.
You got to use them.
And waterbed policies. I didn't care. I was like, I'm using them all.
All of them.
Yeah. And so I'm sure you guys have that down. Probably with your software. Is everything now kind of electronic, or, you know, what?
Yeah, the programs, most of them are like this. They offer an owner portal, a tenant portal. They can submit maintenance things online. We also have somebody that helps us with our after-hours calls. So if it's an emergency, she'll send the vendor out, take care of it. If it's not an emergency, she talks them through that, kind of troubleshoots. You know, we don't want to send a plumber for your clogged toilet if you've got another one.
Right.
You know, it's Saturday. We're going to take care of this on Monday and save the owner some money.
And I'm sure you have all your regular vendors set up for everything. You know,
we don't have our own
plumbing.
in-house people. Some companies in town have their own maintenance people. I've always liked having it independent vendors that they work really hard for our money, and our jobs and our clients, and so they bill fair most of the time. Once in a while we come across, nothing's perfect.
Yes.
But in general, they do good work for us, work with the tenants well.
Yeah.
And so we can send them work orders online. We can text them via the system. Tenants can text us via the system. So that's the big part of it, is time stamping, documentation. When did you have that conversation with that person? What did you tell them? That's very helpful for us. We have an owner that might say, you didn't tell me about this faucet. Oh, yes, we did. Remember right here. And it actually shows that you opened the email. Mm-hmm. So I apologize. Right. Yes, it was an expense to you that you didn't expect or didn't remember. And I do that too. I open an email at midnight or 6 a.m, and you kind of forget about it later. Like, oh gosh, I got that.
And we all have so much going that it's like, oh, yeah, I guess you did tell me. Oh,
of course, if it's a big thing, we're going to call them. But, for the little things that are allowable for us to take the lead on, we just do it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's great. Yeah. And then I'm sure like monthly they get their accounting, and I want to chat just a minute about this, because again, in the continuing education, all of the trust accounts, which is
they emphasize that a
where
lot.
you handle the money. And I read the DRE quarterly newsletters of investigations and people that have gotten fined. It seems like the emphasis truly, the majority is on these trust accounts. And so, you have to have your books in a line. And, that's also, good for the clients to understand that everything is to the penny.
To the penny.
To the penny.
Every month.
Yeah.
On the first.
Yeah.
Or the first business day. Every month. And it's tied out multiple ways. You cross, check all these numbers to the penny. And the trust account is very solid. In fact, I'm proud to say that it was about 1.5 years ago we got audited by the DRE.
Okay.
And we got a 100% clear check.
Oh my goodness, that's
This guy
awesome.
had a little bone to pick. He found one form that when we did the change of ownership, he claimed that I hadn't provided it to him. But even though I showed him the email where I had showed him, this is where that was sent to you, and it was fully signed and complete, he had to note that at the bottom of my audit. Even though everything else was roses, he had to note that funny.
Yeah.
So it's like a stickler with me, but...
you still got that 100%. That's what it's all about.
It was awesome. And it took months, even though everything's automated now, right? Like, I can't imagine the days when they came in your office and said, give me paper copies of your last 6 months of this bank account.
Oh, yeah.
And now we can just download it, email it. We uploaded everything to a website for him. And it was an overwhelming amount of requests and documents and different kinds of statements. He would pick and choose. For this property, send me the owner statement for 12 months. This property, send me the lease. This property, send me the management agreement. And he just kept asking for more and more things, and so done. Done.
Yeah, and I think just even bringing up the word lease, I see so many different leases. Sometimes in lending, we're required to obtain those, especially if we're lending on an investment property. The agencies, Fannie, Freddie, they want to review the lease to make sure that the verbiage is acceptable for lending and not going to have any issues. I'm sure that's something that you have to monitor or at least update frequently. Is there a standard that you adhere to? Like, do you follow DREs, or is there a rental pro company like your software that helps with your leases?
So we do follow the CAR guidelines.
Okay.
And just like any contract that they produce, it's updated here and there, this page, that page. Not the whole thing all the time, but the last major lease update was done of June last year.
Yeah.
So it's pretty current. And then they might add in like one new form or one new addendum. So like say when the new AB 1482 came out in that January, the lease didn't change, but we had to give everybody the new disclosure telling them whether or not they were exempt from the state rental protection. And so sometimes it's just an addendum we have to give to everybody. Sometimes it's something new that floats right into the lease. Like over 2 years ago, they floated in, and so it's automatically attached now to every contract, leases, buys, sales, the fair housing discrimination disclosure. And that tells your client, I have these expectations. These are legally required of us to abide by, and it's a really good conversation to have with any client, just to say, don't forget, this is my job. This is a huge reason why you have me in place, is because I'm going to make sure you're being looked out for, and we're not going to do anything that puts you at risk.
Yeah, so much more with this conversation. I'm second guessing leasing by myself. I'm like, Bridget, we're going to have a conversation after this.
Your tenants sound perfect.
So, again, just I'm sure you rent, diverse properties all over. Is majority of it long-term rentals? Do you do any short-term rentals? Do you do any fully furnished rentals? Yeah. Do you do like any, kind of unique stuff? I have one
client that was living in one of her units. She's got 2 houses on one lot downtown here, and she's got the smaller house in the back. She wanted to travel and visit family for a while. So we did rent that out furnished, but that's a unique situation. We kind of did that because she was already our client. Yeah. We knew we could make this work. Found a traveling nurse, moved right in. They've been there for over a year now. Generally, we just do long-term. That doesn't mean that everybody's in a long-term lease, though. We can do month-to-month. So sometimes on the multi-units, owners prefer month-to-month because if they're not a good fit for that kind of communal living, we can give them a notice to vacate, or we can say, hey, this just isn't working out. Your dog, thin walls, barks all the time. It was allowed to move in, but you're not following the noise ordinances or things like that. So some month-to-month are better for multi-units, and then long-term leases, like 1-year leases on single family.
And then fee-wise, industry-wise, I've always known as like 10%. Is that still...
We can't talk about fees.
Okay, good.
But call me if you have any questions on the fees.
Yeah, no, perfect.
Yeah, and it can vary. Sometimes we'll give a bit of a discount for somebody that owns multi-units. Yeah. They bring us 4 houses at once versus somebody that just says, this is my one rental,
Of course. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then property management, you're already selling me on, what are the advantages. You tell me what you think the biggest, and
I think the biggest advantage of using a property manager is that, and in our office specifically, we answer the phone every day. I have somebody there every day, Monday through Friday, who will answer your questions, look into it, follow up, send the vendor, whatever. Like, you're not going to reach our office, get an answering machine, and then get a call back from 2 to 4. Yeah. A lot of companies have gone so remote that you wonder, like, we had a company here in town renting a house nearby to our office, and we had somebody come into our office trying to see it, and they came into us going, do you know about this house a couple doors up? Because we're like in a mixed residential business area. And we said, no, but let's try and call them. I know these people. They're great people. Let's try and call them and get you some information, because she got there and she wasn't sure on how to get in. I think they had a code box or something for her. And we couldn't reach anybody for over an hour. Could not reach them. She was there for her appointment. She couldn't see it. So I think that's a big benefit of our services is we're in person. You can walk in our office. We're not closed off to the public. A lot of smaller companies, maybe they're not in their office very often, or you have to make an appointment all the time. So we are there to help you if you're frustrated. You can't figure out what this meant on your statement. An owner can come in, immediately sit down with us, and we'll go through a question. Yeah. Tenants too, if they have something wrong on their portal, maybe a charge showed up wrong because there was a change in their rent or something, we can explain it right there. Yeah. And I just feel like that personal touch, we still are able to offer that, and I do feel like that's important.
Oh, absolutely. Initially my first thought was just, the vetting process. And I think that is very difficult and takes a pretty good art to vetting the right tenants. Mm-hmm. You can't predict everything, but having, a science down so much that you can say, hey, it's pretty likely with their credit, with their income, with their reserves, with this, and this, that they're not going to, be an issue. But it's also, the time, as you're saying, you're there to answer the phone. Imagine, most investors that you probably work with have some type of other job, or family or something that they're doing that they would rather do than take I don't want to say a negative phone call, but hey, the dishwasher
phone call.
doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So you're kind of taking that relief, that stress, no matter what that fee, it sounds like it's very reasonable for the time that they've gained just to have it smooth sailing. And it takes the personalization out of it. You don't have to hear the sob stories.
Right.
You're there to handle business. They're there to get paid, right? So it's a good working relationship with that.
Yeah.
So
You had asked about the monthly statements.
yeah.
So yeah, we can email that to owners. We can drop it in their portal. And reluctantly, we still have a dozen or 2 dozen owners that want that paper every month in the mail, and we're happy to put it in the mail.
That would be my grandmother.
Still buy
God
stamps
bless
every
her
month.
soul. And then I'm sure, everything's got to be automated from paying rent to
Paying vendors, they give us their banking, we can automatically pay them. Tenants can pay online. We direct deposit for the owners. It's very, very seamless.
Wow, this is great. Okay, I got to ask, and you can say no. Any
Yeah.
amazing stories or any horror stories that you would like to share? Properties they've vacated and just tore up, and you've seen weird things there, or hey, they left a little care package. I don't know. Just if anything comes to mind.
Okay. So we had a house in Ojai. We still manage it, a beautiful home. And when the tenant finally vacated, it was a weird situation all the way through. We really had to get the tenant out, with some force.
Yeah.
It didn't go to an eviction, but it came down to, you need to get out now. Here's your notice, and we're not going to work this out with you any longer. She left jugs that when the cleaners got there, she swear it was urine. But then all this other weird stuff, like the house was beautiful, but one bedroom had dog poop everywhere. And so we later realized she had puppies, and she must have just locked them in there. And it was this nice wood floor, and it was very dark, kind of like your table. And so when you look at first, you couldn't really see it. And then we were like, the odor, it was the weirdest move out. And my cleaners sweared that the gal that lived there was a witch.
She was possessed.
Yeah. But again, they were great until they weren't.
Yes.
And that's always the thing with being a landlord is you take that risk. Oh, well, I've worked everything out with my tenant. We're on great terms. He's my best friend. Everything's great until it's not. And then you've got that problem and you need somebody to jump in. So better for us to be there from the beginning to prevent those things or to handle them swiftly when they come up, the proper channels to do those things.
Yeah.
We had another one on the East End. It was an apartment building, and the gentleman had only lived there for about a year and very well qualified, quiet guy. And we got a call from the tenant below that water was dripping through her ceiling.
Okay.
And when we went, we called him several times. Hey, we need to get inside your unit. There's something leaking inside. He didn't call us back, and it was an emergency in our opinion. So we go over there, we meet the plumber. We open the door, and the entire house was full of trash. Like so many soda to-go cups.
Just a hoarder.
And mostly just with garbage, though. Even on his patio, all throughout the house, it was just so disheveled. So we go and we wade through, get to the bathroom, and the entire bathroom also full of these to-go cups, all kinds of them, plastic, cardboard, styrofoam, and cigarettes. And so the cigarette smell from being wet in this bathroom, he must not have been using the toilet or the tub to shower. Everything was crowded and full, and so we had to have a hauling guy, actually, who does like the really dirty jobs for us, come in, and he bagged it all up, scooped it up, put it in bags, and so much ash from the old cigarettes had created this almost like paste on the ground. It was almost like clay.
You're welcome, everyone. And see, I got her started.
There was a tiny pinhole leak behind the toilet coming from the line. Tiniest little pinhole leak, but it probably been going on for a real long time. And so that was a lovely, we actually worked with him to get possession of the property quickly.
Yeah.
He was very accommodating because he knew, it was a very sad situation on top of the mess and the work that was required, but it was really sad. And so he accommodated, he moved out quickly, we got in, we fixed the problem, but it was wild.
Oh my goodness.
was wild.
Yeah, you're painting a good picture.
No, he hadn't been there long enough. We're like, how do you do this?
I'm going to give you my horror story, and again, this is more of a reason to give you a call. At one point, I owned, I think, 4 or 5 rentals up in the Central Valley, and I had a tenant that was good until he wasn't, and he got on drugs and stopped paying rent, and it finally got to the eviction process. And so once I finally get the property back, I realized that, I take my construction team over there day one, and we're going to see what he did. Well, we had no power to the property. And so after calling the electrical company, we had determined that he had failed to pay his bill. Then it got to the point that they shut him off, and then he stole a meter. And then it got to the point that he did it repeatedly, so they had to pull the lines from the house to the street.
So that there was just nothing to connect
Nothing
to.
that he could connect to. But then he still rigged it that he could connect his generator to the electrical panel to still have power. So he knew how to manipulate that. And then he took all the doors, the bedroom doors, every door except for the front door, and put them outside. And I don't know what he was trying to achieve.
Creative.
But it was enough to destroy every door in the house that had to be replaced. It took about 30 days to get the power restored.
Wow. That's big.
And I wasn't ever notified, which I was like up in arms.
That's kind of wild because you're the homeowner.
About. Yeah, exactly. What would I have done? It would have been the same process, same thing.
Right.
It was just, it set me back an extra 30 days before I could even begin work. So once I remodeled it, I called the realtor and I just said, sell this. I don't want this property anymore.
But you're still landlording, so
Yes.
you didn't lose all your faith in humanity.
No. There's just better ways to do it. And so I think your services and what you offer is definitely the way to go.
Yeah,
So
it's fun.
Well, I just have to thank you so much. You've been very enlightening on everything from the process of, being a owner to, renting, if that, I'm so out of touch with that. So maybe share everybody, how can we find you? Anything else that you would like to add?
Sure. And, after those horror stories too, I don't want to say everything's a nightmare, right? We have so many great tenants,
Right.
so many nice clients.
I asked for the horror stories.
So many nice owners. It makes it worth it.
Yes.
If we had all those negative things
You
all
wouldn't
the
be
time,
doing this.
but also if it was easy, we wouldn't be needed.
Right.
So we have a job for a
exactly.
reason. I
Yeah.
appreciate our business and our clients. But yeah, we're online. We have our Facebook page, Joe Cap Real Estate, Instagram. We have a website, and just a phone call away.
Yes.
An email too, info@joecaprealestate.com is an easy way to just shoot us a question anytime.
Perfect. Bridget, thank you so much for your time.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for enlightening our guests.
Thanks for having
everybody
me.
listening, thank you for listening. And if you like what you're hearing, hopefully give us some suggestions of some topics or some guests you'd like to hear. Make sure you subscribe to stay tuned for the next episode. And this is Greg Abrams on G Money Real Talk on everything mortgages and real estate. And as we always say, we're out.
Thank
Peace.
you.